Yes.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Russell. Thank you for joining the presentation called How Power BI Changed My Marriage. I hope you're interested in learning about Power BI and getting an introduction and maybe some additional tips that you may not have used. A little bit about myself. My name is Jason Russell. I work with Improving Atlanta, and I've been here about 4.5, actually 5 years at the end of August. I have done multiple Power BI projects with various clients in various industries. I've done a couple of different Power BI training classes. And one thing you may not know about me from this class, but I am a football enthusiast. I still do not like talking about the Falcons or the Super Bowl or any Georgia Bulldogs championship games. But other than that, I love watching and talking about football. And this will be important. I am married for 21 years. I have 2 children, 15 and 12. It's important to know that I've been married for 21 years talking about the topic of this training class. And so today what we're going to be talking about with Power BI, we're going to be talking a little bit about what Power BI is, the fact that there is the Power BI desktop, which is a powerful data transformation tool, and Power BI service, which allows you to share reports and presentations with other users. There are other aspects of Power BI that are a little bit more complicated that we will not be talking about during this presentation. But if you have more complex iterations or how you're going to use that or share that with other people, if you'd like to embed that in a SharePoint site or other websites, then there's additional information that we can share with you by getting in touch with us here at Improving. For this class, when we're talking about importing data, how we transform the data to make the best possible visualizations. We're going to be talking about how you can create tables using DAX or by entering data, going through a few basic measures or calculated columns. We've got a cool little drill through to show you how Power BI can be used, walking you through a basics on choosing the correct visualizations and then how we publish that to the Power BI service. So first and foremost, Power BI is a way to tell stories with data. A lot of times in the past, there have been very basic charts or people trying to do stuff from various systems. And Power BI is really useful to allow people to tell stories with visualizations. So you need to first figure out what's the story you're trying to tell. Is this an operations? Is this a number of tickets? Is this sales? Is this COVID related activities by state? Are you going to be more time focused or more location focused? Is it more graphical with cool charts and interactivity, or is it more table based? So I wanted to determine where are we spending our money? For most of you, if you're married or recently married, finances is a big part of some interactions. I wanted to try to figure out where we were spending our money. Where does the money that we make, where does that go? I needed to tell a story and try to figure out what we were doing. Then the other thing you want to find out is what is the action you want your users to take? Are you wanting them to recognize that the breakdown by gender is more important, by age group? Sales have increased or decreased. A certain product is selling better or worse? Is it doing better in a certain geographical area? What action do you need them to take? Well, for me, I wanted to figure out and want my family to think about where we're spending our money and spend less or focus it more effectively. So I was going to use Power BI to make certain I knew where the money was going, and I wanted my kids and my wife to spend less or spend more effectively. So what is it that you want to tell when you're using Power BI? How are you going to get that data? Who needs to see it? And those are the things that Power BI is really effective at. And lastly, I'll walk through, want to let you know how you could get in touch with me. Obviously, we'll go over a little bit more details for now. But now what I'd love to do is to jump in and tell you how we got the data, where it lived, how I transformed it, and then what I did to start building some visualizations. Now, one of the things that we will talk about in this demo, some of the things that we're going to, the way I did things, the way we're displaying it may not be effective for an in report, but it's really effective for a demo to show you some of the different things that Power BI can do. So some of the things I'll walk you through is these may be best practices. I didn't necessarily do it in the demo just to show what can be done. So first and foremost, what I want to talk about is we got data. My method of getting data was to pull data from Amazon. And so Amazon, I found out, had a cool way to get data. You could pull your account history for a year at a time. It limits it to a year at a time. So I needed to, I was able to go out, grab the data into an Excel format, and then start pulling that into Power BI. Now, the first thing that I identified was in the Excel spreadsheet that the categories were not always well thought out by the way I got the data, and I had to do a little bit of information in my Excel spreadsheet as I pulled from my account history to try to initially get the categories the way I wanted to see. But you can see one of the things that I have here is I've got the date, which is a key component. I've got the category, I've got the price, and eventually you'll see I also have where that was shipped to, because I found out I needed to break down where we were ordering things for maybe for work or for a gift for someone else and for our personal use. So I'm going to walk you through how I decided to do that. So this is what the initial Excel spreadsheet looks like. A slight amount of changes that I made before I even poured it into Power BI to try to group and categorize the data. But then the first thing I did in Power BI is I was able to retrieve the data. So if you're familiar with Power BI, you're definitely familiar with the way to bring in new sources of data or to transform the data. This is known as the query editor. Let me close this out. And so the first thing that I did when I brought in the data is, this was the first spreadsheet I brought in. As you can tell, when I first brought it in, the columns are a little bit messed up. I had to actually go through, and there's some data transformations that you do in Power BI to really get your data prepared appropriately. And if you are able to transform the data effectively, it makes your Power BI reports much, much easier to use, much more effective. A lot of the times, if you are running into issues with the way your reports are looking, 9 times out of 10, it's because the data transformations haven't been accomplished correctly, or there may be some other things that you need to do. So the first thing to point out is this is based on, if you're familiar with some of the Excel query editors, this is based on a lot of the former Power Query processes that you may have seen in Excel. So you may be familiar with that through some other tools that you've used, but this is a really good way to change the data, to cleanse it, to make it a little bit more effective to use. So I've used this to correct a few misspellings, to trim data. Sometimes you have extra spaces, sometimes you have leading spaces that cause issues, and Power BI has a great way to go in and make those changes. So what I did first was I promoted my headers to make sure that this is the effective columns to use. And then in some cases, I have to change the type. And what I love about this is this actually walks you through the different steps that you take to transform the data. As you can tell right now, before I actually change this type, the order date is listed as a text field. That's not very effective for doing some of our information in Power BI. So you can change this type by clicking on this. You can change it to a decimal number, or you can see all the different items that I have. Clearly, in this case, I wanted to change this to a date. And so when I change this, you actually see the change type show up. And now instead of the ABC that I see for my order ID, I actually see the cool little calendar icon. And that tells me that now Power BI is recognizing this as a date field, as opposed to a text field, as opposed to a whole number field. When we scroll over and look at the different types that we have, you can see this is a numeric value. This is a whole number field. You have different ways to look at, there's text, there's URLs, there's geographic data. And so this is a really excellent way to make sure you're getting the data in the correct format that you need. So in my case, I'm going to walk you through the different changes that I had to make to the data. Clearly, depending on the data that you're bringing in, you may or may not need to do this. In many cases, if you're bringing in data from a SQL database, for example, you don't actually have the need to change the data because SQL already has that in the format that you're looking for. In some cases, you may or may not need to update this to a date. There's different things that you have to do to your data to transform it, and I'm just walking you through what the options are I had on this. Yours will likely be very different as you bring in and transform the data. So initially, I just had to change the type. I had to change and promote the headers. But one of the interesting things with this situation is that Amazon only allowed me to bring in a year's worth of data at one time. I could have brought in the data into an Excel spreadsheet and then brought in another Excel spreadsheet. What I was going to do for this demo is show you how you can actually use the append query in Power BI and actually take disparate spreadsheets, different information, and make it into a single table. So what I did was I have my orders from Amazon from 2018, and then I had a second table for our 2020 data. And I did, when I initially did this, I had 2019 data. So I've actually got in this table, I actually have 2019 and 2020 data. But to make it easier when I get into my visualizations, I wanted to have that into a single table. So what I did in my Amazon orders table, which is the main table, is I went in and using my Append Queries option, I was able to actually create a table, and then I appended my 2018 data to this table. And since I hadn't removed any columns, I hadn't made many significant other changes, appending, all it does is it adds the data from one table and adds on additional rows to the second. Had another step where I had to append my 2020 data. And as you can see, as I'm walking through these steps, you can actually see that the data is changing. The data is actually adding, I'm adding to this data as you walk through these steps. And it's a really powerful way, once you've done it once, to go back through and make sure you've done the correct steps that you were expecting to take. In this case, I had to make sure I had 2018 data, 2019 data, and 2020 data. And as you walk through the visualization and the user experience here is very clean in that it shows you how to walk through, and it shows you what it looked like even before I made these steps. So I can even go all the way back to the beginning and see that I'm back at the point where my headers have not even been promoted yet. So the great way to do this, if I click on the gear, I can actually see what additional table I've appended. There are additional options that you can do. If I had 14 years of data, if I had other things, I could actually append several more, and you can just pick. I could have picked the additional tables that I wanted to use. So in this case, I just had the two spreadsheets that I was appending. And then another key important part is I can actually go in and I can remove columns that I don't need to see. A lot of times from a performance standpoint, I don't want to have data in my Power BI model that I am not going to use for the visualizations or for some of the information that I'm looking for. And you don't always know at the beginning of the project, at the beginning of the file, what columns I'm going to need to keep. So I tend to wait until I know a little bit more about what I'm going to be doing before I go through the process of removing columns. But it's very important to remember that the more data that you have in your Power BI model, the performance could be impacted. In a case of mine where I only have 500 rows of data, it is not going to matter. The performance is not going to be an issue. But if I were to have a table or a spreadsheet or a SQL database, or a view that had millions of rows, it makes a great deal of difference how many columns, how much data is included, both from a size standpoint and a performance standpoint. General rule of thumb is whenever possible, remove as many columns as you can and still include for the visualizations that you're looking for. So little pro tip there, go through and remove those columns. So I removed several of these columns that, again, I don't think I would ever need or want to bring in. You can do that early on in your data set, or you can do it once you brought it into Power BI, and it really depends on your original data source, what the best option is. So The other cool thing that I can do in this query editor is I can add a conditional column. And what I wanted to do was to show where are these orders coming from? Am I getting them to my house? Am I getting them for work? Am I getting them for a gift for someone else? So in my case, the way I decided to do that is I wanted to base it on the address information, because I knew everything that comes to my house is going to be for home. If it doesn't, if it goes to another address, it's likely going to be for my wife's work, and I would be able to exclude that from some of our discussions about why we were spending this money. And so I was able to, if the shipping address begins with the word address, because some of them did, that's going to be a work. If it begins with 3035, that's coming to my house, and I need to question somebody as to why we're ordering this from Amazon. If it begins with another address, in this case 4400, I'm assuming that's work as well. And if it's not any of those, this is likely a gift that we're getting for someone else. And again, you will likely have, I'm certain you will have different reasons and different conditional columns or different information. This is not the way that you would likely do it, but this is a great way. If your data, if you don't have the option to change the data in the source, you can actually make this conditional column in your model, and now you can slice the data based on different information that you're looking for. And so this is a great way to create that. Second performance point for some of you that may be a little bit more advanced, from a Power BI standpoint, creating a column within the query editor using the language within the query editor is a better performant criteria than doing it with in a different way. And I'll show you how you could do that in the Power BI visualizations. But from a performance standpoint, creating your conditional column here instead of using DAX is going to be a much better performance impact for your Power BI model. So whenever possible, it's a great practice to get into, a great habit is to do it from your query editor rather than from DAX. If you have to do it in DAX, you can, but if you in any way can do it from this, it is typically a better way to do it from a performance standpoint here. So I added a conditional column that lets me see if this is home, gift, or work. We are going to use that later for one of the visualizations, so I'll show you how that works. The next thing that you can do in the query editor is you can split the columns. So you can see right now, before I go to this step, the zip code had a +4. Well, I don't really need the +4 for what I'm doing now, and I wanted to show how that could be done. So you can actually split this column, and you can split it based on delimiters, based on a number of characters, upper to lowercase. So they're all different ways that you can split this column. In my case, the delimiter, because it was a zip code, is a dash. And so I created that split column. I actually went in and I said I wanted to use a custom delimiter of a dash, and just in case, I used it at each occurrence of the delimiter. Now, again, you may or may not ever need to do that, but it's great to know that it's here. As you can see, when I move to this step, what I love about the way this is set up is that actually shows now I've got two columns, one for zip 1 and one for zip 2. So you're able to see at a glance, here's what happens when you take this step. If I were to go back to this step, it goes back to my zip. And now I can see I have two different zip columns. So again, using the applied steps is a great way, a great tool to get in and do this. So the next thing I did was I actually went in and I filtered the rows. There were some that I felt like I didn't need. In this case, I changed the column headings. I wanted to make sure I was able to, I changed this to a numeric value instead of a text field. And then I actually wanted a little bit more, a better way to name the columns, so you can rename those columns to be a little bit more friendly to what you're trying to do. We're now really at the point where I have transformed the data the way I need to see it, or the way I think I need to see it in our visualizations. One thing that I have been burned with before, and something that is not always well known, in Excel, you can filter columns and you can filter data, and it really doesn't always impact what you're doing. In your query editor, if I were to filter to only look at a specific category, this actually determines what data gets into your Power BI model for your visualizations. So if I were checking something in here and I just wanted to look at apparel, for example, if I were to leave this step in here, this is going to limit what I see in any of my visualizations when we get to that point, and will cause a lot of confusion if you're not aware that this actually limits the data that makes it into your Power BI model. So always be very aware when you filter, when you make changes in your query editor, this has an impact on what data that you see when you get to the visualization panes. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to take this out because I don't want that step to be in there. So now that I've gotten all of my data to the point where I think this is exactly what we need to see, we're going to get to a point where I'm loading the model and I'm going to move forward with building the visualizations. Now would be a good time if you have any questions about something that we've done, about features that are available, or different ways that you've seen some of the transformations occur. Now would be a good time to ask your questions, and we'll try to get those answered. So, all right. So the other thing I wanted to do in here is I wanted to show how we can actually create a table in Power BI. I wanted to have a budget. I wanted to say we wanted to limit the amount of money that we were spending each month. So Amazon doesn't have that. The data that we get from Amazon doesn't have a budget. They don't want us to have a budget. They want us to spend as much as possible, right? They're trying to make money. But I wanted us to have a budget. Well, how do you do that in Power BI? There are a couple of different ways to do this, and I've got two different ways that I'm going to show you. One is within this query editor, you can actually just enter data. And so this brings up a way to show that you can actually just create a table very basically using, you can import this from Excel, you can create it manually by typing in the data. And so what I did was a very quick way. I wanted a budget by month, and you're able to, I created this in Excel, I imported this in, and we just got a budget with the month. And as you can see, I graciously allowed a new budget. We increased the budget every year from $300 to $350 to $400 after different discussions with the wife about what we should be spending. I graciously allowed us to have an increased budget. And so by using this as my model, by entering the data from the query editor, this now becomes part of our Power BI model. And the key thing to remember, and we'll go through the relationships in just a second, is I need a way to be able to relate this table of data, to relate whatever I create here with my other information. If all I had was a budget number, I wouldn't be able to use anything in Power BI to really look at that per date, because the other information that we have has a date value. So make certain if you are leveraging this, if you're using this to create a territory or a region or a sales hierarchy for whatever reason, that the data in this spreadsheet or in this table needs to be able to relate in some way to your data that you have in your other systems. Okay, so very easy to do. Power BI makes it very easy to enter the data by creating this or by pulling in from other sources. Once I'm done and I'm ready, we're going to go ahead and we're going to close and apply. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually bring in the data to our Power BI model and allow us to start building some visualizations, to build some tables of data. But the next thing I wanted to show you is this is in Power BI, we've got our report pane, we've got our data pane, and we've got our relationship pane. Each of them has very specific information and reasons why they're important. The relationship allows us to actually relate these tables together so that we have a way in Power BI to slice and navigate through the different tables. A lot of times you use some type of ID column. In my case, I didn't really have an ID that I could use, so I had to come up with a different way to do this. So what I've done is each of these tables is related to the date. So in here we've got the date is related to my month, and in my Amazon order table, the date is actually related to the order date. So you can actually go in and create, you can change the relationships. There's different ways of either creating or changing the direction of the relationships. Really need to know what you're doing when you do that, because it can have a big difference in the way the expectation of the results that you're looking for. This is probably the second way that most people have some issues, is the relationships are not set up the way they were expecting. So if you're having issues with the results that you're getting on your visualization, this would be a good place to look. So, and were there any questions that you need to answer? Good, okay. All right, so obviously this is very much a finished a product. I'm not building it from scratch here. I'm showing you what was done. But what we're showing is these are the visualizations that we can use in Power BI. And so when we created this, we've got our the line graph, that's showing the information based on the date and the budget. We've got a card, we've got our average spend, we've got a visualization here that shows the location, and we've got a column chart here. One of my other colleagues has a really good presentation on choosing the right visualization for the story that you're trying to tell. If you get a chance to look at some other items that we have, he makes sure that I did not use any pie charts in showing any of the data here. If you have a burning need to use pie charts, you probably want to watch this on choosing the correct visualization by Ed. So hopefully that's available for you to watch. But so a couple things that we're going to talk about here. We do have these other tables. Another way that to create a table in Power BI is to use DAX. And a great tool if you are really planning on using Power BI. DAX is going to be your friend. It could be your enemy because it could be difficult to use. I liken DAX to chess. I tell a lot of clients that DAX is easy to learn, but it's very, very difficult to master. From what I understand, that's the same thing people say about chess. I have not mastered it. So anyway, so DAX is easy to start using, but can be very complex. In this case, I used the calendar function when I was going in and I was creating a new table, and I used the calendar function, and I wanted to limit this. I wanted to create a date table to make sure I was able to really show dates by months or by weeks or by days, however I wanted to show it. Generally speaking, I always either use or create a date table in Power BI models that I'm going to do any sort of time intelligence. Makes it very easy to use a similar month name or year name across multiple visualizations. So whenever possible, either importing that from a SQL database or creating this using the calendar function is a great easy way to ensure that your dates are able to be used. So in this case, I created a date table. I also created, let me just show it in here. So I've got a date table. I also created a month using DAX. I was able to format this into a format that I thought would be user-friendly. I created a month year because I wanted to be able to look at different months and different years in some of the visualizations. And so what you can see in doing this, I was able to use a simple concatenation type. You may recognize this from Excel. Some of the formulas are similar to Excel. You can also use format. So format is a DAX function that lets me create this with a short name, and typically use this for limiting what I'm able to display on a chart or something like that. And went in and I created a year as well. And I use these to do the concatenation functions. You will not always use this, but for a demo purpose, I wanted to make sure that you saw that DAX can be very powerful, and not only to create measures and sums, but also to create additional columns of information that maybe you don't have from your source of data. So really get used to using DAX. This is a great tool. Even for beginners, you're going to use some type of measures or some type of calculated columns, and DAX is going to be a good way to leverage that. So as you can see, I navigated over here to my data tab just to see what the data is going to look like when I've imported it, when I brought it over. Is this what I was expecting to see? Is this the information that I'm looking at? You can see I've got the order date here in a format that maybe I want to change this to a different format. It doesn't change the way the data is stored, but it changes the way the data is presented in your Power BI model. So when you're getting into this desktop model here, what I'm changing here doesn't necessarily change the underlying format of the information, but it does change the display of how that's going to be presented. So looking at what we're doing here, I created this visualization, but when I first created this, I didn't have a way to sum up what it was by month. I realized that in order to really explain and share the story that I wanted, I needed to be able to see how much money we were spending each month. Like most businesses, we tend to think of our budgeting and our finances in a monthly format. So I wanted to display this not on a week-by-week basis or a daily basis, which gets a little bit too granular, but I needed to see this in a month-by-month format so I could really walk through this and having these discussions with my family. So how do you do that? How did I go through and group this up? How do I organize this to really be effective? Well, in order to do this well, you create measures in Power BI. And the cool thing, one of the other cool things that Power BI helps us with is seeing what is the data that I have? What is the format that I'm looking at? So the different icons that we're showing here actually helps you see what is the data that we're looking at. When I see this calculator, I know immediately this is a measure. This is something that's been created. This is something that is using DAX in some way to group or sum or filter some of the data that we're trying to look at. And what I wanted to do, what I also tend to do when I create these, I tend to label them with the word measure or count or sum or some distinguishing feature that lets me see at a glance and organize them in a way that I care about. You don't have to do this. This is not a requirement. This is something that I found to be best practice, ease of use for how I'm doing this. You may or may not choose to do that, but this is how we can do it. When I click on this measure, when I click on any of these items, I see the DAX that's used to create this. So in this case, measure order total is really just the sum of a column in my Amazon orders table called item total. So pretty basic. I'm not doing any filtering. I'm not doing any counting. There's nothing really complex. This is just a way for me to always use the same order total in any of the different visualizations, any of the different report pages that I might build. So it's a good way to start the process of knowing I'm going to have all this in the same format. I created a couple of different measures just to see what this is going to look like. This is my average, and you can tell here my average per month. So this gets a little bit more complicated DAX. This average X allows me to keep the filters. And again, we're not really going into much detail here on what that means and how we're building that. But a couple of cool things that you can do if you're not a DAX superstar, if you don't understand enough about DAX, Power BI has these really cool features called a quick measure. And this allows you to make a measure that's a little bit more complicated by selecting the different types of either filters or aggregations or time intelligence that you're looking for. So in this case, if I were actually, instead of caring about the average per month or average per time period, I could actually do a month to date. I could do a year-over-year change, a rolling average. Wow, we're really getting a little bit more complicated information, a running total, a total for filters, all these different types of information. And Microsoft is adding new features basically every month. So a month from now, if you're looking at this yourself, you may have different calculations or different features available that has been released. So a couple of cool things to do here that you don't actually have to know everything. Some of these quick measures may help you. So a couple of things that were, the other thing I was just going to show you here is we also have a way to, where's my mouse? The shipping address, this is a location, and you can tell that by the globe icon here, that I've actually called this a categorization of a city. And this is extremely useful when we get into this location map. If you have location information, you can actually set the category to be a city, to be a state. And so Power BI will actually recognize that in its mapping features to really allow you to see this in a location-based, which is a very powerful feature of Power BI. So how did I create this line graph? What do you do to actually start building your own visualization? Pretty straightforward, and I'm not going to go in and do all of this, but all you've got to do is drag a value over here, and it starts trying to create what it thinks to be the chart or visualization that you're looking for. And so I can go in and I expand it, I can change the type, and since I've already got this, I'll show you what I did. I actually dragged over my month year to be the axis, the x-axis. My values that I wanted to display in this were my total orders and my budget. And because I've already brought in this month year, Power BI intuitively knew that I need to group up and group this information based on the total orders that were in the month of June for 2019, that were in the month of March for 2020. And so very quickly and easily, Power BI is able to group that by the year, the month. If I were to change this from the month year, and I actually just wanted to see this by the year, I could take this out and I would just see the year. Well, clearly that's not very helpful. That doesn't tell a story, but it does allow me to see what does it look like when I use different values, when I use different information. And so this is a quick and easy way to create new visualizations. What if I actually wanted to see this as a bar graph? Does that help? No. What if I wanted to see this as a pie chart? Well, this is just ridiculous. But very quickly and easily, I can see what visualization makes the most sense for the story that I'm trying to tell. For you, maybe a bar graph makes more sense. Maybe for you, a pie chart does make sense. And you can tell, and just by changing the visualization that's displayed, you can easily make a different story. So I felt, after reviewing this, I felt that this line graph was the most effective way to quickly and easily tell. Well, we can tell, so because I knew November and December were the highest months of spending. You know what happens in late November and December? My wife spends money on Christmas presents. We buy Christmas presents. It makes a lot of sense that December is going to be higher than September, for example. Was able to quickly tell April was much higher. Most of us realized that in April, we were all stuck at home for the COVID-19 quarantine. We weren't going out. We were ordering a lot of stuff in. We were ordering groceries. Instead of going to the grocery store, we were ordering it through Amazon. Instead of going out and shopping for clothes, we were ordering on Amazon. So our Amazon went way over budget in April. But I understand why. Instead of getting upset about this, I'm able to quickly and easily tell and make a good intuition as to why we're going over budget. Why is your sales going up? What happened during that time frame? So a good way for us to track this by looking at this. The other thing that's really cool about Power BI is the ability to look at different date ranges. So I created a slicer based on my date table that allows me to look at not just the last 12 months. What if I only care about the last 12 days? Do I have anything? Have we purchased anything in the last 12 days? Nope. What about the last 30 days? What does that look like? Well, we can tell in May and June, we've got the last 30 days. This slicer allows me to really make some cool changes, and I can actually look and go back even further depending on the date range that I have in my data set. So we're going to go back to the last 12 months, and calendar would be the last 12 full months, and months is just, even if it's a partial month, let's bring in the data. And you can tell when I choose the last 12 months, it actually shows me that we're going back from June 25th to June 24th. And what you'll notice is that all of my slicers, all of my visualizations, when I change this, it actually changes all of the visualizations, all the information on this page. So if I only wanted to look at the last 6 months, our total drops down, our average spend goes down, what we've spent the most on is changing, all because this visualization affects all of this slicer affects all the visualizations on this page. So slicers are a really cool way to show this information. I have here a card because I really wanted to see at a glance, what's our total spend with Amazon during this time frame? It's hard to kind of grasp that just from adding all these up. So a single card, in my case, really helped us see this is how much we spent over the last 12 months. My average spend per month, if you remember, I made that measure over here that is looking per month. It actually changes based on which slicer, the date range that I select. The other cool thing that I really think puts Power BI in another level as a visualization tool is, what if I really only cared about what we're spending on health and beauty over the last 12 months? So we can tell that we've actually spent $922. The average has gone down, and I can see over the course of a month what we've spent. And one other thing you'll notice, the budget didn't change. Why is that? Well, I didn't tell Power BI what my budget for health and beauty is for each month. I've just got a single budget amount that's a total budget. If I had a budget by category, then I might be able to tell the budgeting, for health and beauty, for electronics. But in this case, just by clicking on something in this column, I can affect what we're spending or what the other charts see. So one other thing that I wanted to go through is this idea of a drill through. So what we have here is, you can tell I built this detail page, and I actually wanted to not just see overall what we're spending, what's the category. I want to understand, what are the different things that we bought? Why are we spending so much money? Wow, electronics is the highest. What is my wife, what are my kids spending on electronics? By right-clicking on this value, or right-clicking on this, I can actually see this. I have this drill through detail page. So what this allows me to do is, now when I click on this, this actually takes me to a new page that is just based on electronics. This shows me all the electronics that we have bought over the last several months. And wait a second, this is the Eero that I bought. That's a good purchase. That's a fine purchase. We needed that. What about this? Oh, my son is buying something for his computer. Did he have authorization to buy that? I'm going to go talk to him. We can ignore the AirPods Pro. That is a need. I needed that for work. Obviously, there's no reason to really get concerned about that. The Kindle, I needed a new one, right? This was, okay, so what this allowed me to do was to actually see from the electronics, Jason, they're actually yours. Some of this that you're buying from Amazon is not your wife, it's not your kids. Slow your roll on getting upset, and let's change my marriage from arguing to enjoying. So anyway, so now I can go back. I want to go back to my main page, but the drill through, really easy to do. You create a page. I created a page of information that I just wanted to see the details. I wanted to bring in the title. I wanted to know who sold it. I wanted to know where we were getting that from. These are the different columns that I wanted to have on this. I didn't really need a chart. I wanted to see the details. So I built this as just a table of data. And then when I go through, I turn on and I create a drill through where the category is electronics. So this is it's called a drill through feature, and it's actually showing based on the category. It's going to allow me to limit wherever I have in the report something that is the category. I can actually get to that detail page. I can get to that drill through page. So really cool feature of being able to really make it interactive and allow users to experience some almost website-like features by taking them to different pages. You can control what people see. You can create an interaction and maybe get more details that you'd like to see. For this page, it wouldn't be useful to have a table of data. That doesn't give me the summary. That doesn't give me the high-level look and feel. But a table of data might be useful for some people, for some features. So a great way to use a drill through feature to get additional details, additional information without cluttering up your main report page, which is an important part. So the last item on this visualization that I think is important is this location. And right now, I may not, if I were creating this page for a client, I might not create a visualization of a location where everything is in Georgia. That's not really very useful. It doesn't really tell me any trends or stories, but it is for a demo. It is very cool to show how Power BI has this very powerful location mapping. If you have location information available, the ability to display stuff in a map to see where most of your sales, where most of your tickets, where most of your outages are occurring can be very powerful for users depending on the story that you're trying to tell. And what is interesting here is there's the ability to drill down. There's the ability to go to the next level in the hierarchy. There are different ways that I can set this page up. For this visualization, the most important thing to be able to do is to actually to see some more details, because if you remember, I had not only the state, I also had the city. So with this drill down on, when I actually click on Georgia, it allows me to see all the details of where the information, or sorry, where the packages are going. So you can see the vast majority are showing up here incoming. There's a small number going over here to Augusta. You don't know that, but I know that's likely going to my family, my extended family. My sister, my mom lives there, so maybe this is going to them. We've also got a couple of other locations that make sense in Roswell and Alpharetta. Where's this information going? I can click on that and I can actually see, when I do this, I can actually see what are all the different items that we're shipping to these locations. When I drill back up, I can actually see we go back out immediately to Georgia. And if we had more information showing, about where the different packages, if I was more excited, or if I was more less boring, and we were actually shipping packages to other locations, that would be pretty cool. I may decide, if I were building this for a client, to ignore the location because I can have more space for a different visualization. But if they said, hey, I really need to know the location of where all this is going, this is a great tool to use. So the last thing that I wanted to at least mention, we don't have time to really go into how this was built, but Power BI has this cool feature called a bookmark. And so what I wanted to show here is you can actually click on this bookmark. This is a bookmark feature that allows me to actually bring out, expand data. There's different features and different ways to show this, but I didn't want to necessarily take up all the room on my visualization of which location that we're shipping to as a selection filter. But this allows me to, I just want to look at gifts. I only want to look at what we sent to work, for example, or I only care about home. So now this slicer allows me to select and make selection criteria based on what I want to look at without necessarily taking up a lot of room. And so we're using the button feature. There's some buttons that we can that are now pre-built in Power BI, or shapes or images or text box. You can do a lot of features with some interactivity with these items, and you can add a cool button to, maybe you want to pop up some help info to show some more details, but you don't need to always display that. You can use a bookmark to display more information or less information. Maybe you can reset filters so that you don't have to go back and check each one individually, but you can create a bookmark to reset all your filters. A lot of cool ideas on how that can be done. There's a lot of information out on YouTube or Google from Guyana Cube or some other people that are sharing a lot of information that are some great ways about how to use bookmarks and other features in Power BI. So I want to talk about that. The last thing that I wanted to talk about as we're getting close to the end of time for this meeting is what do you do with this once you're ready for other people to view it? Power BI has, as I mentioned before, there's a Power BI desktop, which is what I've been showing now. And there's also the Power BI service. The Power BI service allows me to publish this report to the powerbi.com, mypowerbi.com tenant, and lets other people view the report if they have a Power BI Pro license. Now, clearly, in this case, I'm not really needing to share this with my company. I'm not really needing to share this with a lot of people. We can talk about this as a family around the dinner table, and I'm not needing to really display this or publish this. However, for purposes of the demo, when I wanted to publish this, I've logged in with my account, Jason Russell at improving.com. And when I publish this, this actually opens up, I do want to save those changes. This actually opens up all of the different works. Sorry. Let me bring this up. But it actually brings up this idea of, it shows me all the workspaces that are available, and this may or may not come up, I apologize. But when I go to publish this, this actually publishes this to the powerbi.com service under my same tenant, and it actually allows me to share with other people that have a Power BI Pro license, and I can share it to the different workspaces that I have available. And this is how Power BI allows me to see the different security. So you can see we've got a lot of different workspaces that have been set up, but I publish this to my SQL Saturday workspace, and it shows me the data set, which is basically the underlying data that's presenting this report, and then it shows me the report that I am wanting to see. So you can see that in here you have all the same features, all the same information. I don't have to see the filters. I can minimize some of this to get as much real estate as possible, and I still have the ability to, I only want to look at 2020, and you can see all the same functionality exists. I actually want to go in and look at our health and beauty. I can see the details of what we've ordered and make sure those are all in line with what I was expecting. Maybe I want to see grocery and see what we're actually spending our money on from a grocery standpoint. This may also help me see that maybe some of these have been categorized incorrectly. If I look at this and I recognize that maybe some of these were actually gifts and were not actually, well, these are gifts. Some of these may not actually be grocery. Maybe I've categorized this incorrectly. So for standpoints of your data, maybe this would be a great way to allow you to see where some of the information was either set up incorrectly in your database, in your SQL, in your Excel spreadsheet, and would allow you to go back and make changes, modify the data, make sure this is a little bit cleaner, and you go back through and revise the process. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions before I go into anything else? Okay. I will mention one thing that we're not showing on here very much because this is relatively static data. The ability to refresh your data on a nightly basis or a regular basis is a really cool part of Power BI. If I had a data set that was changing more frequently or that I cared about more frequently than monthly or bi-monthly, I could set up scheduled refreshes that it would actually go into where I have the data stored and would actually refresh that data, and I can set that up to refresh on a regular basis. I can actually go in here to my data set and I can set up a gateway. I can check and see what the refresh is set up as. I can see if this is actually set up to refresh. In this case, I'm only doing it on demand. I don't have a scheduled refresh set up. But for most of the reports that we built for clients or the reports that are a little bit more robust, you can set up a scheduled refresh process and refresh up to 8 times a day, depending on your license requirements, so that your data is a little bit more up to date. So one of the things I love about Power BI is that ability to tell a story. I was able to easily tell when I brought in the data that we are keeping on track, that the items that we're using make sense. We're not spending money frivolously. My wife is a wonderful person and has a lot of great information and provides a lot to our marriage. So that is how Power BI changed my marriage. Thank you for attending. If you have any questions, I believe this is going to be recorded. You can watch this later. Share this with your family and friends. If you have questions about how I got this data from Amazon, again, you can reach out. My email address is jason.russell@improving.com. If you are or your business is really looking to expand or leverage some Power BI for your own reporting needs, you can reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to us at iahelps@improving.com. And we'd love to work with you guys on building Power BI to share and tell your stories to your users. So thank you very much.